A healthy 8-month-old baby disappeared from her cradle in the bedroom without making a single sound. No broken windows, no forced door, no ransom note, no witnesses. Her parents searched for 9 years. Detectives grew old on this case and retired without an answer. And then, 9 years later, almost by accident, a mother reached into a dusty box in her attic, pulled out her daughter's old toy, and pressed play. What came out of that toy was not her daughter's laughter. It was a stranger's voice, recorded the night her daughter vanished, hidden inside a child's teddy bear for nearly a decade, waiting for someone to finally listen. If your child disappeared from a locked house, with every window shut and every door bolted from the inside, where would you even begin looking? Would you trust the police? Would you trust your neighbors? Would you even trust yourself? This case tore a small American town apart for almost 10 years because everyone in it believed they already knew the answer to what happened. They were wrong. Every single one of them was wrong. And the truth had been sitting in a cardboard box in an attic the entire time. Stay with me, because the ending of this story is not what you think it is. Maple Hollow was the kind of town where nobody bothered locking their front door at night. Population under 4,000 people. One diner on Main Street. One church with a bell that rang on the hour, every hour, so reliably that people set their watches to it. 3 teachers at the elementary school who had taught 2 generations of the same families. In the spring of 1992, Sarah and Daniel Whitmore moved into a small blue house at the end of Larkspur Lane with their 8-month-old daughter, Emily. Daniel worked the morning shift at the lumber mill on the edge of town, the kind of steady, unglamorous job that let a young family buy a modest house and sleep easy at night. Sarah taught piano lessons out of their living room 3 afternoons a week, mostly to the children of neighbors who lived within walking distance. They had been married 5 years by then. Friends who knew them described the two of them as quiet, devoted, the kind of couple who didn't need excitement because they had each other. And they had Emily. Emily was, by every account, an easy baby. She slept through the night more often than not. She loved music more than almost anything, the way some babies simply are drawn to it before they can even sit up on their own. She loved bright colors, reaching for the reds and yellows of her toys before the duller ones. And she laughed, a small, hiccuping laugh, every single time her mother sang to her. Sarah sang to her constantly. In the kitchen while she cooked. In the car. Most of all at night, standing over the crib, one hand resting lightly on Emily's chest as her daughter's eyes grew heavy. Among Emily's toys, there was one that stood out from the rest, something a little unusual for its time. A soft, brown teddy bear with a small recording device sewn carefully into its chest. You pressed its left paw, and it would play back whatever message had last been recorded into it. A gift from Sarah's sister, who lived 2 states away and wanted a way for Emily to hear her mother's voice even when Sarah wasn't in the room. Sarah used it almost every night. She would press the paw, wait for the small beep, and speak softly into the bear's chest before laying Emily down. "Good night, sweetheart. Mommy loves you. See you in the morning." It was a small thing. A toy, nothing more. The kind of object that fills a nursery and gets forgotten the moment a child outgrows it. Nobody in that house had any reason to think about it twice. 9 years later, that same worn, dusty, half-forgotten toy would become the only piece of evidence that mattered in the entire case. But before that could happen, something had to go terribly wrong first. And it did on a rainy night in October, when Emily Whitmore was 8 months old. It rained hard that night, the kind of rain that drums against the roof and makes a house feel smaller, more sealed off from the world outside. Around 9 o'clock, the power in the house flickered once, dimmed, and then steadied again. Sarah barely noticed it. She was folding laundry in the next room while Daniel watched the late news, the volume low so it wouldn't wake Emily down the hall. At 10 o'clock, Sarah checked on her daughter one last time before bed. Emily was asleep on her back, one small hand curled near her cheek, her breathing slow and even. The night light in the corner cast a small, steady circle of gold light against the ceiling. Everything about the room felt exactly the way it always did. Sarah pulled the door most of the way shut, leaving it open just a crack the way she always did, and went to bed herself. Just after midnight, Daniel woke briefly. He thought he heard something outside, a faint metallic sound like the front gate swinging on its hinge. He lay still for a moment, listening. Nothing followed it. He told himself it was only the wind pushing against the gate the way it did most stormy nights, rolled over, and went back to sleep. He would spend the next 9 years wondering if he had been wrong to fall back asleep that night. At 3 in the morning, Sarah woke up for no reason she could ever fully explain afterward. Not a sound, not a cry, just a feeling, sudden and cold, the kind that pulls a mother out of sleep faster than any alarm ever could. She lay still for a moment, listening. Silence. Complete silence. In fact, which was strange because Emily almost always stirred at least once a night, a small murmur through the baby monitor, if nothing else. Tonight, there had been nothing at all. She got up anyway. She told herself she was being paranoid. She walked down the short hallway toward the nursery, her bare feet cold against the floorboards, and pushed the door open. The crib was empty. For a moment, Sarah's mind refused to process what she was looking at. She told herself Emily must have rolled somewhere out of sight, into a corner of the crib, behind the bumper pad. She stepped closer. She reached in. There was nothing there but the blanket, still folded neatly at the foot of the crib exactly the way she had left it hours earlier. Untouched, undisturbed. She checked the window. Locked from the inside, exactly as it had been every night since they moved in. She checked the bedroom door. It could only be locked from inside the room as well, and it too was locked the way Daniel always left it out of habit when he came in to check on her before bed. There was no broken glass, no mud on the carpet, no footprints, no sign that a single other person had set foot in that room since Sarah had said good night to her daughter 5 hours earlier. And there was no crying, which somehow was the most frightening detail of all. Sarah's scream tore through the house and brought Daniel running down the hallway, so fast he nearly fell. Within 20 minutes, patrol cars lit up the length of Larkspur Lane in slow, rotating red and blue, waking half the street. One detective stood in the doorway of the empty nursery for a long time, saying nothing, before he finally spoke the sentence that would follow this case for the next 9 years. Babies don't simply disappear, but somehow this one had. And what happened in the hours after that would only make the mystery deeper. By sunrise, half the county was combing the woods behind the Whitmore house. Search parties moved in slow, careful lines through wet undergrowth. A helicopter traced the winding path of the river for miles in either direction. Divers went into the cold water searching for the one possibility no parent ever wants to consider, and came up with nothing. Dogs picked up a scent at the nursery window and followed it exactly as far as the front gate, where it stopped completely, as if whoever had carried Emily out of that house had simply vanished into thin air the moment they reached the road. Detectives began questioning everyone who had ever set foot near that house. Neighbors on both sides, Sarah's piano students and their parents, the family pediatrician, the one daycare worker who had watched Emily on 2 occasions when Sarah had a dentist appointment. Every single person had an explanation for where they'd been that night. Every single explanation checked out. There was no ransom call, no demand, no note left behind, no clue at all pointing toward a motive of any kind. Within a week, national news crews had set up cameras outside the small blue house on Larkspur Lane, and the quiet town that had never made headlines for anything found itself split down the middle. Some people whispered, quietly at first, and then not so quietly, that Sarah must know more than she was telling police. Others were just as convinced that a stranger had been watching this family for weeks, waiting for the right night. Then investigators found something that made both theories feel suddenly, uncomfortably possible. In the days before Emily disappeared, someone had called the Whitmore house late at night on 3 separate occasions. Each time, whoever picked up heard nothing but slow, steady breathing on the other end of the line. And then, after several long seconds, a click and the call would end. Who was making those calls? Nobody could say. The number traced back to a payphone just outside the county line, one so heavily used by so many different people passing through that finding the caller among them was, according to the lead detective, like finding one specific raindrop in that October storm. The case was only 2 weeks old, and already it felt like it might never be solved. 2 weeks after Emily vanished, an envelope arrived at the Whitmore house with no return address and no name on it at all, just Sarah and Daniel's address typed neatly across the front. Inside was a single sentence, typed and signed. "Stop searching." Forensics found no fingerprints on the paper, no match to any typewriter registered to anyone in town or in the surrounding 3 counties, for that matter. A second letter arrived a month later. A third arrived 2 months after that. Always one line, always completely untraceable. Around the same time, a woman 2 streets over came forward and told police she had seen an unfamiliar blue station wagon parked near the Whitmore house on several evenings in the weeks before Emily disappeared. It was the first real lead the case had produced, and detectives chased it with everything they had, cross-referencing vehicle registrations across 3 states. Thousands of blue station wagons. Thousands of dead ends. Not one of them connected to Larkspur Lane in any way investigators could prove. Another witness, a young mother who lived at the far end of the street, told detectives she had seen a woman walking down the road that same night, carrying what looked like a small bundle in her arms. It was the single most promising lead in the entire case, until she was interviewed again, and her description changed. The woman's height changed. Her hair color changed. Even the direction she had supposedly been walking changed, shifting a little more each time detectives sat her down to go over it again. Eventually, even the detectives who wanted so badly to believe her had to admit her account couldn't be trusted, not in a case this serious. That lead collapsed exactly the way the blue station wagon had. Months turned into a year. The letters stopped as suddenly as they had started. And the case that had once filled the front page of every newspaper within 100 miles began, slowly and painfully, to grow cold. 1993 came and went, and Emily's first birthday passed with a small, quiet cake that nobody but Sarah had the heart to eat. 1994 came and went. Then 1995. Sarah never redecorated Emily's room. The crib stayed exactly where it had always stood, in exactly the same corner, facing exactly the same window. Every single year, on Emily's birthday, Sarah placed a small cake on the table beside that empty crib and lit the candles by herself in a room with nobody else in it. Friends who once dropped by every week stopped visiting almost entirely, not out of unkindness, but because grief with no ending is a hard thing for anyone to sit with for very long. Daniel began picking up every extra shift the mill would give him, working longer and longer hours, as if enough exhaustion might eventually dull what nothing else seemed able to touch. The distance between Sarah and Daniel grew slowly at first, and then all at once. By 1996, they had separated. Neither of them said the word divorce out loud for a long time afterward, but the small blue house on Larkspur Lane became Sarah's, and Sarah's alone. One by one, the original detectives on the case retired. The file grew thick with dead ends and thin with anything resembling hope. The missing child posters that had once hung in the window of the grocery store faded in the sun until, one afternoon, someone finally took them down without telling anyone. New families moved into houses on streets nearby who had never even heard the name Emily Whitmore. Only Sarah still believed her daughter was out there somewhere, alive. She couldn't have told you exactly why, if you'd asked her. She simply refused completely and stubbornly to stop believing it. 9 years is a long time to hold on to a feeling like that with nothing at all to support it. And then, on an ordinary afternoon in the fall of 2001, everything changed. Sarah had finally decided, after 9 long years, to clear out the attic. Not because she was ready, exactly, but because the house needed repairs and the attic could no longer be avoided. Near the back, tucked beneath a folded baby blanket in a cardboard storage box she hadn't opened since the move, she found it. The old recording bear. Its brown fur had gone dull and gray with dust. Its once bright eyes had faded. The batteries inside had died years earlier, and the small recording light no longer blinked the way it once had. Sarah almost put it straight back into the box. Almost. Instead, she sat down on the attic floor with it in her lap for a long moment, and then carried it downstairs wiped 9 years of dust from its fur, and drove to the hardware store for new batteries. She told herself she only wanted to hear her daughter's laugh recorded from all those years ago. Just once more, nothing more than that. Back home, at her kitchen table, she slid the batteries in and pressed the small paw. At first, there was only static. The hollow, crackling sound of old, worn tape struggling to play. Sarah nearly gave up entirely, nearly set the bear down, and told herself it was a mistake to try. And then, faintly, beneath the static, a recording began to play. It was not her voice. It was not Daniel's voice either. A man's voice, low, urgent, barely above a whisper, came through the tiny speaker. "Hurry, she's waking up." Then silence. Then the muffled sound of footsteps, moving quickly. Then a car door, closing. The recording ended. Sarah sat completely frozen at her kitchen table, the bear still in her hands, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had never recorded that message. She knew every single recording she had ever made into that bear, every bedtime message, every silly song. Daniel had never touched the thing either. There was only one night in the entire history of that toy's existence that this recording could possibly have come from. She called the police before she had even managed to stand up from the table. What happened next would take this case somewhere none of the original detectives ever imagined it could go. Investigators brought the old teddy bear to a specialized audio lab 2 hours away, where technicians spent days cleaning up and enhancing the ancient, degraded recording. Beneath the static, more sounds slowly began to emerge. The steady, unmistakable patter of rain against something, a roof or a windshield. The low, distant blast of a train horn somewhere off in the night. The faint, familiar tone of church bells ringing in the background. The same bells that had marked every hour in Maple Hollow for as long as anyone could remember. One detective, listening closely through headphones for the 5th or 6th time, noticed something else buried even deeper beneath all of it. A radio, playing softly in the background. A late-night announcer, reading the news in a low, even voice. By cross-referencing that broadcast against archived radio logs from stations across the region, investigators were able to pin down not just the exact date the recording had been made, but the approximate hour as well. It matched the night Emily disappeared, almost to the hour. And then the audio team found one more voice buried in the recording, quieter than the man's, harder to make out, but unmistakably there once they isolated it. A woman's voice, whispering just 3 words. "Don't let her cry." Suddenly, the theory that had seemed almost impossible 9 years earlier made a terrible kind of sense. Someone, in the middle of carrying Emily out of that nursery, had accidentally pressed the recording bear's paw, and the toy had captured a fragment of the crime itself, in real time, as it happened. And then it had sat silent, forgotten, in a cardboard box in an attic for nearly a decade, waiting for someone to press that paw again. This was not paranormal. This was not coincidence. This was evidence hidden in plain sight for 9 years, inside the one object nobody had ever thought to look at twice. The case that everyone believed was closed forever was suddenly, unmistakably, open again. Investigators began the long, painstaking work of comparing the 2 recorded voices against everyone who had ever been questioned back in 1992. Thousands of old interview tapes were pulled out of storage and reviewed all over again, one by one. For weeks, nothing matched. Then a retired officer, brought back in as a consultant on the reopened case, remembered a name that had nearly slipped through the cracks entirely 9 years earlier. A local mechanic who had reported, the very morning after Emily disappeared, that he had heard a baby crying inside a blue station wagon parked outside his shop before dawn. At the time, with hundreds of leads flooding in every single day, his statement had been logged into the file and never fully followed up on. Detectives reopened that old, half-forgotten file and traced the station wagon's ownership history through more than 2 decades of vehicle registration records. It eventually led them to a woman living several counties away, who over the years had told various acquaintances about several different pregnancies, none of which had ever produced a hospital record, a birth certificate, or a single witness present at any actual delivery. Former neighbors of hers, when questioned, recalled that she had suddenly appeared with a young daughter sometime in late 1992, with no memory among any of them of ever having seen her visibly pregnant beforehand. No adoption paperwork existed anywhere in any state database. No birth certificate existed for the child at all, under any name investigators could find. Quietly, and very carefully, so as not to alert anyone before they were certain, investigators arranged for a DNA sample to be collected. The wait for those results would be the longest few weeks of Sarah Whitmore's entire life. The results came back and confirmed what 9 years of searching, waiting, and refusing to give up had never quite been able to prove on their own. The young woman living under another name, in another town, believing she belonged to another family entirely, was Emily Whitmore. She was 17 years old now. She had grown up her entire life believing, completely and without a shadow of doubt, that the woman who raised her was her biological mother. She knew nothing about a small blue house on Larkspur Lane, nothing about an empty crib kept exactly as it always had been, nothing about the birthday cakes lit, year after year, in a room with nobody else in it. Police arrested the woman who had taken her. During questioning, she told investigators that she had suffered several devastating pregnancy losses in the years leading up to 1992, and that in her mind, that grief had somehow justified what she did next. She admitted to watching the Whitmore family for weeks before that October night. She admitted to making the silent late-night phone calls. She admitted to writing the letters warning Sarah to stop searching, terrified that if the case were ever fully closed, someone might eventually look closely enough to find her instead. Emily herself was physically completely safe. She had never been harmed in any way over the 9 years. But in the space of a single afternoon, everything she had ever believed about her own life, her own name, her own mother, came apart entirely. She now faced a choice that no 17-year-old should ever have to make. Which life was real? The only one she had ever known and remembered? Or the family that had never, not for a single day in 9 years, stopped waiting for her to come home? Sarah and Emily met again for the first time in a small, quiet room arranged by a family counselor trained specifically for reunions like this one. Neither of them knew what to say. There was no movie-perfect embrace, no flood of instant recognition passing between them. Just two people sitting across a small table from each other, trying to find some way to reconcile 9 entirely missing years within the space of a single, quiet afternoon. Recovery did not happen quickly, and it did not happen easily. It happened slowly, in counseling sessions held week after week, in short visits that grew a little longer each time, in a relationship that had to be built almost entirely from nothing rather than simply pick back up where it had left off. Daniel came back into regular contact with Sarah for the first time in years. Drawn together again by the daughter, neither of them had ever truly stopped mourning, even after they had stopped speaking to each other. The old recording bear, the one small, forgotten object that had accidentally captured a crime and held it completely silent for nearly 9 years, was placed carefully into a memory box in Sarah's home. It never played another message again. It never needed to. It had already said everything it was ever going to say. Sometimes the smallest, most forgotten object holds the truth that everyone else has already overlooked. In this case, justice didn't arrive through luck. It arrived because investigators refused to let the recording go once it finally surfaced, and because one mother, through 9 years of silence, never once let go of hope. What do you think investigators missed in those first critical hours after Emily disappeared? Share your theory in the comments. And if stories like this keep you thinking long after the video ends, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next mystery.